Welcome, welcome, welcome. You are listening to Building the Black Educator Pipeline, the place where we talk to real people in the real struggle, doing the real work. I am your host, Shayna Terrell, educator activist dedicated to the lifelong struggle of freedom and liberation for my people. Shout out to all my co-conspirators out there listening today. What an honor it is to be able to sit down with the man who gave Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast its start. That's right, y'all. Chris Stewart, CEO and founder of Brightbeam and Education Posts. Today, we will be talking to our guy about all things media and education. Chris, what's up?
Man, everything is up, but I love that intro. Thank you. I'll take it all. I need it. So I appreciate it. Good to be here with you, as always.
Thank you. Listen, we have to give you your grace, brother, because at the end of the day, I'm being serious. Like, I wouldn't have this opportunity if you didn't have this platform. So we completely appreciate you for that. We've been able to grow followers, really get out some great content, but it's because of Brightbeam and Education Posts, and you as the founder and the CEO. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Listen, we got to get people flowers while they're here, okay? We appreciate you, brother. So, Chris, I don't know if a lot of people know who you are, right? Like, I don't know if a lot of founders and CEOs of podcasts actually sit down and talk on the podcast that they, produce. So I would love for you to tell our listeners a little bit about who you are. Who is Chris Stewart? What should we know about you?
I mean, I often tell people that I'm a lifelong activist, but, in recent times, I've been having to rethink like what that even means, right? Advocate, activist, voice, loudmouth, influencer. There's all these different ways in which you can approach having a voice in the world and really like sticking to an issue that you care deeply about that aligns with your values and moving with it. First and foremost, I'm a parent. And, I always tell people, let's level set. I'm going into my 5th decade of being a parent. So that's a lot of parenting. That's a lot of years of having to interact with the child development process, the process of schooling and raising. And, anybody who's listening to this right now who has multiple kids knows that you have multiple different stories going on, different versions of how you have to parent. And this isn't like a throwaway line. This isn't a joke. When you think about like the parenting thing, there are things that keep you up at night. Like, am I doing the right things for my kid? Am I getting the right opportunities before them? Am I really being a good, God gives your children a guardian to help them become who they're supposed to become. I believe they have this God-given potential, this thing that they're going to become. And you could mess that up. Or you could be a good part of it, whatever, but are you a good steward of that?
Yes.
I didn't think that with my oldest and then my second and then my next one or whatnot. It evolved over time. I expanded the role of what I think my parenting is. And I have always felt like if I'm dealing with that, then other people are too. So if I'm having school problems, there's other people having those same problems. If I'm having problems with a 504 plan or an IEP in a school, other people are, which actually creates the need, I think, for us to share our stories, for us to be loud mouths, for us to be storytellers, to exchange information. Word of mouth is king in this world. And that's really like how I explain the background of what I do. But to be very concrete, if people go to Twitter and they find me at Citizen Stewart, that will tell you that just watching my timeline will tell you a lot about how I approach the world. Like what am I doing? Because that's what I do. I'm a digital activist. I'm a pain in the butt of the system online.
Yes, digital agitator. We love it. We love it. What I love about your intro, right? When I ask people, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do? People generally go right into listing their resume, right? Like the work they've done. And you spent the majority of your time talking about fatherhood and being a parent. I think that's super dope that is what drives you. And that really, for you, is what defines your work and who you are. That's a beautiful thing. And I think that's a different way to look at what drives people in an aspect of life. Like, actually, what's your work? You like my kids. My kids is why I'm here. My kids are why I do what I do.
That's now, all your work. I mean, all of you are you're developing the future. When you die, when you die, what do you want your legacy to be? What are the things that you're leaving behind that are going to make a difference in the world? I know I don't want when I die, I know I don't want the same world that I came into. So if I were to go into the future 50 years or 100 years, let's just say like right now, what is 2023? Let's go to 2073. First of all, this is one thing that we've known from every sci-fi person watching this who's done sci-fi stuff is we're never in the future.
Never.
Black people are rarely in the future. It's like whoever's imagining the future is still imagining it with us being like one version, like one person on the team.
Yep.
Right?
Like where all the black folks at in this future y'all created.
This is why I love Afrofuturism. Right. I'm not imagining the same future that the rest of the world is. We're raising a revolution. Each child that we raise is a little revolution. It's a little contribution to the world being different tomorrow. A subversive parenting. Black parenting is subversive. People of color and marginalized people who are raising children with hope and with the skills to navigate, infiltrate, and double cross the system. Those are the people that are making the future right now. That's parenting. That's of color parenting, right?
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
You are planning for a future to be different and your children are the plan.
I love that.
Right? So blocking and tapping. Anyways, that's why I go right to fatherhood. That's why I go to it.
Well, because again, it's tied to activism. And I don't know if people who are activism, like in the activist mind, they don't tie their kids to being a part of a revolution or having a small army of little people that you're training, right, to kind of pass the torch to or to be, an army of disruptors with you. They don't look at parenthood as like that. You described it one way in the first beginning as like being a steward of what lives in your child. But a really important part of that are the morals, the values, and the mind span and the perspectives that you bring to that as a parent. Like, what do you want your legacy to be? But how do you want your child to change the world? And I don't think people look at parenthood in such a revolutionary way as that. I think that's a dope perspective that you bring.
I appreciate that. I do think that there's one way to be parent where you're kind of on autopilot. You just got to go to work. You got to come home. You got to make dinner. You got to do the things.
I'm surviving out here.
Surviving. It's mechanical parenting. So you got all the mechanics right. There's spiritual parenting too, of knowing I'm raising a spiritual being in a world that's not very spiritual. That creates a whole different set of challenges and things to think about. Now, I don't want to give people who are listening to this too many things, but there are a lot of things. Your spiritual parenting is one thing, and I need a lot of help with that one, right? Like the world is against us in so many ways. Our kids are taking on psychic messages all over the place, and we're not paying a ton of attention on that. There's also a level of parenting that's really planful. Did I correct my own educational trauma? Did I go back? Did I sit down and think this through? I'm going to be a parent. I'm going to be in charge of another human being. So first of all, I got to clean out my own closets. And in our own closets, we have a lot of like educational trauma with systems and whatnot that we don't want to pass on. Like on the day we were born, we were handed a 50-50 compromise, like some new stuff and good stuff and some carryover. And we need to reduce the carryover. Right, with the next generation. And education is a big part of that. First, though, educate yourself. Like as an adult, we got a lot of stuff to work on ourselves. Sharif El-Mekki, who you know, him and I talk about this a lot. And I've talked to all of y'all that are doing the Black Educator, Let's Educate Children stuff. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
That's pedagogy and pedagogical concerns. I think about andragogy a lot. Like, it's how do you teach adults? Andragogy deals with adults. Pedagogy is for children. So we are missing half of the educational of our race, the educational promise, which is, yes, we got to think about how we educate kids. We also have to continuously think about how we educate adults. And that's andragogy. And that's adult, learning and education. And for parents and parenting, you need a little more of it than anybody else does before you start trying to mold a new mind.
That's true. And it's good that people like you exist in the world, because I feel like once you're grown, honey. putting my energy into the future. Okay. I believe in them. I'm going to build a new with you. We're going to start over with you. Okay. We're going to build holistic human babies. I ain't got no time to fix your little broken adults. But again, that's why there are many avenues of many careers in the world. There are people like you who are invested in educating this adult population, which is, when I look at the work that you do, that is your work. Your work is education. So I'm really curious about how you came to this journey of being invested in education and media, because that's what your platforms are dedicated to. You could have went and did journalism on a whole bunch of other things. But you are very, very hyper focused on education and media. How did you kind of get on that trajectory?
My first learning about education was not having the one that I needed to exist in the world. So I didn't have, like, my education didn't work. Let's just be real clear. So, I love being in this world now because I'm always talking to fancy people that have all the fancy book learning and have done all the things. And when I hear about their educational pathways, it wasn't mine. It wasn't the same one I had. And what I learned was the brutality of not having the education that you need to do the things you want to do. Because in my 20s, I worked in restaurants, I worked in hotels, I did service industry work, I did retail, I did customer service, data entry, I did temp jobs, temp work, labor industry work. So you name it. This is the job that I have right now is probably my 46th job now when I add them all up in my life. And in my 20s and early 30s, I was doing everything that falls outside of college educated work. Right. So I was able to see the 2-level trajectory that people have when they graduate high school, go into college, and then go into the work world versus me. Right. And especially on a lot of them temp jobs that I did, I was the help, and I was surrounded by a bunch of college educated people who were the thinking people who smelled the same way they smelled when they went home as the way that they smelled when they came to work. Right. Like that is a different lifestyle, wall to wall carpet, air conditioning or whatnot. That's what education buys you in rough, brutal terms in a capitalist society. A very strong difference between pathways. What you need to do is you need to clean hotel rooms all day long for 8 hours a day and understand how you feel like you are in a different part of the economy in the world when that's your work and that's what you do. So education for me, like when you say, how did you come to education as a thing or whatnot? My very first thing was I'm screwed. My education was terrible. My K through 12 educational experience was a mess. And then when I became a father at 22, and I felt the weight of being responsible, not just for myself now, but for somebody else. The one thing that old people had always taught me in my life was, once you have an education, nobody can take it from you. There was a reverence in my family for the ones that completed their education and had done something with it. So for my child, my first parenting idea was, it didn't work for me, but it's going to work for this one. I'm going to do something here. This one is going to go the straight way through 12 grades, then through college and whatnot. I didn't know how that was going to happen. That's how I really got involved in all this. I didn't know how it was going to happen, but I knew I was going to do it. I was going to
make it happen,
like work on it. And I educated myself. I want to tell people, like, there is a lot to be said for self-education. There's a lot to be said for, autodidacts, people who study a thing on themselves in their spare time, because that's what I did. And then when it came to activism, number one, it started opening doors for me in terms of studying, like what I needed to do for my child. I started having value to other parents. So people who were similarly situated to me, we would move from one school to another school. And I started thinking, wow, I have some value here. I have information now. Like, I'm leading people to different schools. Like, I'm telling my son's friends, y'all got to get out of there. You got to come over here and see this thing, right? And that made me feel valuable. Like I might be a restaurant worker. I might be a, service worker or whatnot. I'm also I'm part of the proletariat that's educated. I'm educating myself. I've got information. That's the one thing. Listen, there's organized money, there's organized people, but there's also information, and information is king. And once I felt that, it was off to the races, because it was like, oh, I can be an activist. I can educate myself. I can share this information in a way that makes the system nervous.
This is fascinating. Yes, this trajectory is very fascinating.
That's where it comes from. That's my origin story. And even doing this work. And, you know, when you say the media part, how do you get to the media part? Mm-hmm. The media part was I started saying, like, was one thing to have information and have a voice, but how do you get heard? Like, how do you get out there? The newspapers, like I used to write things. I can remember the first time I got published in a newspaper in an op-ed. That was a really big deal for me. And I got addicted to it. I was like, how do I make that happen again? But newspapers are such gatekeepers, right? Like, so when blogging came along, and I tell people this all the time, I'm like a OB, I'm an original blogger. I was blogging in 99.
Okay.
Right? When it was early. Boy, when those tools started coming out that let anybody who had an internet connection be heard and blog and be seen, that was it. That was all she wrote.
So you was one of those people. You like, I got a voice, I got a type, I got a computer. I'm gonna just be talking. I'm gonna get it out here. Which again, why you're also so active on Twitter. Like,
yep. I go home and
hear me.
Listen, I used to be in AOL chat rooms, Yahoo groups. If anybody remembers Yahoo groups, and that became my thing. I was like, oh, this is a way to be heard.
So you were just in there in AOL chat rooms and Yahoo groups debating, like, and stating opinion, going on from people, sharing, of course, and like mindedness, but you just in there.
Yeah, I came across very educated people too, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that or whatever. And, you know, people be sharing links. That became a big part of my education and my activism now. Like, it's why it's so native to me to do digital things in terms of my activism now, to be online, to be heard, to reach people, and to get other people to do the same thing. It's one thing for me to do it, but it's another thing to find interesting people and say, you should be out there. You should be heard. The public needs to hear from you. They need to hear your voice. Stop saying this stuff to me in private.
Somebody else needs to hear you. Mm-hmm. There's two things with this that I'm taking from. So basically, you're not college educated in terms of media. Like, you didn't go to school for communications.
No, my college education, when I did go back and went to school, is in education.
Okay.
It's in ecology. So it's the study of education, the study of learning with the focus on autonomous learning, a focus on self-directed biomythography as a driver for learning. But that's a lot of fancy stuff I threw in there. I just, you know.
It's fancy, but it's also the way that you have directed your life.
That's right.
So studying self-education and how that is a benefit to people or others. Mm-hmm. But what's also interesting is, I mean, this is what you do in terms of giving other people a platform. So a lot of times people are like, oh, you do your podcast. Like, how does it get produced? Or who are you doing this with? Oh, the Center has a podcast. I'm like, oh, yeah, we have a podcast. We're in partnership with Brightbeam. And people are like, what is that? Mm-hmm. Or who are they? Mm-hmm. So I would love for you to say, what is the goal of Brightbeam and Education Post? Because I think that there are two big media platforms that have a large influence in the education space. And like I said, people sometimes don't know who Chris Stewart is, or they know you. They don't associate you with Brightbeam. I don't think people know that you are the
it's so funny. It's true.
Of Brightbeam.
Yeah. In some ways, that's a success, though, in that, like, I've got my own platform for my voice, but I want everybody else to build a platform for their voice. The world needs to hear from you. That's my message to anybody listening right now. You are thinking deep thoughts. You are thinking about the state of the world and the way that things need to change for our kids and for our people. If that is true and that's happening in your interior life, I'm not giving anybody a platform. I'm helping you build your platform because it's the perfect companion to your voice. You have a voice. That's your weapon of choice. And now you need a platform to amplify it and to be heard and to be seen. Just like you have an email account. That's the way I think about platforms. What's your favorite way of communicating with the world? If you are a vocal person and you want to do a podcast, that's a platform. If you're a writing, thinking, intellectual person, a blog can be your platform. It could be either or both and all of this together all at once. If you are a short thinker, like the person who can like put together information quickly for people to understand, you might be a short form video person that would be good for TikTok. My thinking is the reason Brightbeam exists and EdPost exists is because people of color, marginalized voices that don't get out through corporate media and gatekeepers need to be heard from. in bigger numbers. Students, parents, educators, guardians, community folks, our babas, our walking libraries, are people like Dr. Carr, who you talk to all the time, who are walking libraries. I mean, literally make me buy 3 books every time I hear from them or talk to them or see them or whatnot. I only have one message. The world needs to hear from you. Not everybody does what I do, which is let me help you figure out whatever technical kind of platform you need to amplify that thing. That's why Brightbeam exists. That's why EdPost exists. And because oftentimes people have monetized this or commoditized it, or they want to, do it for you for money or whatever. I want to do it because the revolution needs as many of you as is possible out there to have a platform and be heard and be seen from different perspectives. That's the bottom line.
I love it. Listen, y'all heard it here. Y'all talking to me because he feels like y'all need to hear from me. Okay?
And some of y'all are hard of hearing. So let me say that part too.
Some of y'all just say, listen. You ain't listening out there.
No.
Well, who is the specific audience for Brightbeam Education Posts? Like, who are we looking to get our messages out to? Like, what's y'all target? Who would you say is the target audience for both of these platforms?
I feel like it's multiple audiences, because I think at the end of the day, the reason you want to be heard is because you want to move power. Like, you want to influence the public debate, the public discussion, change minds, raise public understanding, public awareness, challenge lies, challenge misinformation about your people or about your children, especially about our children. Nobody has lied about more than Black children and brown children in the United States. They are the most lied about, the most, they're the most studied and the least taught. They're just an object. They're never really, more than an object and even a subject. They are not really seen as living, breathing people, and they are awfulized to death. So if you listen to 1,000 hours of media about Black boys, for instance, right? If you listen to 1,000 hours of American media about Black boys, they are awfulized out of humanity, out of existence. So when you ask me who's the target audience, first, like, there's a target message that needs to be said, which is to stop awfulizing our kids. Our kids are happy, loving, gregarious, funny, silly, crazy, sometimes stinky, talented, creative. Yes, they are amazing beings.
Yes.
So my audience first is stakeholders who know what I just said is true and are willing to say it and put it out there. That includes mothers and guardians and fathers. Black fathers, in my mind, are invisible in the United States, and they've been made invisible. They need to be made visible. That's why we build these platforms. My 8 Black Hands podcast is father powered, Black men who care about education, not just of our own kids, but of the 8 million Black children that are in the system right now. That is a version of our doing everything that I just said, having a platform, correcting the record, making ourselves visible, and whatever audience wants that. Right. So, whatever audience wants that, that's not for everybody, and it doesn't have to be.
And I like that. I think sometimes when I'm thinking about this show, I think about my target audience, and my target audience really, I would say, are like current educators, people who are in the system right now, so that they can come to this show, take something from this show, take it back to their districts, make a difference, listen to people that are in the work, doing the work just like them, find similarities. So all types of stuff. But there is sometimes an ounce of me who wants a hater to listen in on this show. And that's because I want them to see the magical things and the beautiful things. I'm not even use the word magical, right? Because this whole magical Negroes, right? We're just people and we're talented. But to hear the phenomenal things that Black people are doing in education. The things that Black people are doing to continue to build the legacy and the history of education that we've had since the beginning of the time. Like, that's important to me. So I do hope that haters tap in to our platform. Now, what I see a lot of times is Education Post has a lot of haters. People be on y'all stuff wilding out sometimes. And I just be like,
I got dedicated haters.
You do, as Citizen Stewart and just as
both
education blog, people be on y'all. So what it has me thinking sometimes when I'm reading education posts and I'm seeing the haters is there a political agenda with your platforms? Like, do you target a specific political audience as well, or take a specific political stance?
I mean, we are for the marginalized, and there's haters on all sides of that. Mm-hmm. I've got right-wing haters. I got left-wing haters. Right-wing haters, especially in education, for instance. Let me just be specific and concrete. In education, if you talk about school choice or charter schools or vouchers or that stuff, there's a group that will applaud you on the right, because the right is all about those things because they hate the public education system so much. And the left will come after you. The public education system is the best thing that ever been created in the world. And it's never been racist, and it's amazing, and it's democratic. It's for everybody or whatnot. So cool, whatever. And then if you start talking in favor of public education as a human right and, public good and that sort of thing, now the right hates you, and they start coming after you with all kinds of you just like a woke kind of globalist and blah, blah. So on any given day, I'm a neoliberal woke, left-wing, right-wing kind of, blah, blah. And listen, everybody has heard the saying, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. Mm. And I add to that, education is a permanent interest of a marginalized people. Any people that has been marginalized systemically in any society, education is a permanent interest. Whoever's for it or against it, whatever, don't matter. You're the same every day on that issue. I don't mind pissing off everybody. At the end of the day, like, listen, we got 8 million Black children in a nation of 300 and something million with a $800 billion Pentagon budget. If we can't get 8 million Black children literate, numerate, critically thinking and succeeding in meaningful and gainful lives in this economy, I don't care who I piss off to say it, right? Mm. And when it comes to education, whether we should have choice or not have choice, whether it should be public or should it be private or blah, 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 it shouldn't be any of those things. It should be determined by us is what it should be. It should be determined by us. And there are values that I have. There are ideas that I have that are going to run up against everybody. Left-wing unionists, right-wing conservatives, the clown of the MAGA people, the clowns of the overwoke kind of white progressives who want to lecture me about what's best for us or whatnot. They all going to get mad. Stay mad. Get mad. Get big mad.
And stay mad.
Stay mad. Be as mad as you need to be. Just like 3 days ago when I was preparing to say the cliche things that people say about MLK every year or whatnot. Mm-hmm. I didn't know this, but I always fall down rabbit holes. His last Sunday sermon that he gave was literally the message that was stay woke. That's literally the message. The message is so crazy reading it because it's called something like remaining awake. And waiting awake for the revolution is what it was called. Remaining awake for the revolution, which I thought was so crazy. This man, right before he died, that was 5 days before he was assassinated by the United States of America. 5 days before he was assassinated, his message to us was remain awake, which is today's version of stay woke, right?
Because he already knew what was up. And last year when I had Dr. Carr on around MLK time, I went into this whole thing about like the media and how, they completely whitewashed this man's legacy, right? Like to the point where you don't, the Martin Luther King that's publicized, who is that? That's not Martin Luther King. Like y'all just made him into some completely different, we about this peace. And again, did he use nonviolent? Yes, the dream that you cut off most of the speech for, right? Like let's just be clear. We look at about 6 lines from the I Have a Dream speech and then we move on. Y'all don't read the whole entire speech and hear what that man said. But on top of that, this whole notion that, he was nonviolent. Yes, it was a strategy and a tactic to get to where we needed to go. Like that's the fact that this, again, publicizing like he was a pacifist and he was about peace and Martin Luther King wouldn't react this way. What is wrong with y'all? Stop it. Y'all didn't know that man. And again, as you say, he has many works. He has many works. He has many speeches. He has many essays. He has many letters that will tell you and truly define to you who Martin Luther King was as a person. Very radical. That's why he died like one of the most hated men in America when he died. That's why he was assassinated, because he was very, very radical. And the same system that we're bucking up against now, he was bucking up against then. So I'm very curious to where people think MLK would stand on the side of the line at these times right now. So super interesting that you bring up that point. And I think,
where he would stand now is what made me go read his last stuff, like where he was ending up, where he was landing. People should do this with Malcolm and with Martin. Is go to the last stuff, because that's as far as they had gotten. Like that was the culmination of their lives and their work. And his last work really was questioning all the things that he had been involved in before. He was questioning and rethinking, and they killed him. The United States of America killed Martin Luther King Jr. because he was effective, not for any other reason.
Exactly.
Right? Because he was effective and he was starting. So that's your clue. Go back and look, what was he starting to latch on to? He was starting to be against militarism, systemic racism, and poverty.
Yes.
As his main three. And he was going to unite poor people and give poor people a platform. Think about this. We're talking about platforms right now. We're talking about who needs to have a voice and a standing, and what his platforming was going to be of anti-war poor people who had bread and butter issues in the world. And they wanted to challenge the economic system. Put all those things together. That's what killed your brother. That's what got you
exactly
killed. Which is why I don't want the one platform. This is why I need all y'all to set up platforms too.
Chris said, don't have these folks coming for me. Don't have my platform being the only revolutionary platform that elevates these voices. He said, don't have these people coming for me. Talking about Chris, Chris out here uniting everybody. Okay,
that's
we
right.
got to get him.
We need an army. I think what we learned from Huey P. Newton, from Malcolm, from Martin, from all of these folks was one messianic leader will get killed.
Yes, you could kill a revolutionary, but you cannot kill the revolution. So you definitely need an army of folks.
Look at you busting out the quote of all quotes. That's the one that. Okay. See.
It's true. Kill the revolutionary, but you cannot kill the revolution.
This is right.
And for all the critique that sometimes folks have about, the Black Lives Matter movement, it is really hard to say who was the leader specifically of that movement, which is why the government has such a rough time, which is why they assassinate the character of the movement itself, right?
That's right.
You can't kill nobody. Who led that? It was a bunch of...
I do want to back up and say there are some dead bodies.
Yes.
There are some suspicious dead bodies that were found in trunks in Ferguson that
absolutely
people don't talk enough about. Yeah.
Got swept right under. Yeah, I've seen a series on that, on a bunch of mysterious deaths that happened as a result of Ferguson uprisings. And again, we look at the deaths. So not only are the deaths not talked about, the infiltration of that organization. It's not by design. I mean, it is by design. It's not by mistake that some of these people got filthy rich and were sponsored. Like that's on purpose. The government know how to ragtag people and bust up like they've been doing this since forever. COINTELPRO, it's been happening. It's going to happen over and over again. But the one thing that I do like about just the concept of Black Lives Matter is there were leaders, but when you look at that movement, you don't necessarily attach one leader to it. At least I don't. Whereas you look at the civil rights movement and you could say Martin Luther King. You look at the Black Power movement, you say the Panthers, but there were specific leaders in the Panthers that you elevate. You look at Black nationalism. Everybody talks about Malcolm X. Black Lives Matter is just like, that was in the hands of the young, baby. The young people took it and reigned through that. But yeah, you're right. We need to get some more media folks in the movement.
One thing that I think is important about that, to this discussion about education and media, building platforms and all of this, is in the Black Lives Matter movement, there were the hashtag people and then there were the activists. And those were two different groups of people. So when I started out this conversation talking about, like, I function a lot in the digital world as the main means of my activism. It's the expression of my violence. That's where I do violence. Like, is through digital means. That's my tool. That's not everybody's tool. This is my voice, my weapon of choice. This is how I get heard. This is what I do. But there is a difference between people who go into hashtag influencing and confuse that with activism. And even confuse that with digital activism. Activism is when the digital tools are an extension of your real world ability to move messages, information, knowledge, power, and you know things about direct action. You know how to apply pressure to targets. Who's your target? Why are you targeting them? What's the message that needs to get through and bust through? And what's the change they need to make with their power? How are you going after power? That's different than creating hashtags that you hope everybody clicks on and follows you and puts you on the cover somewhere, and then somebody gives you a grant so you can buy a big house. That's hashtag activism. And that is different than there are people in the Black Lives Matter movement who may be on Twitter, but Twitter is an expression of the fact that in the real world, they're also shutting down freeways. They're also, organized. Like, it's a tool. It's not the entirety of their popularity.
Well, it's not focused on me, right? It is a tool that I'm using to aggravate and agitate. It's not something that I'm using as a tool of advancement. I don't need recognition. I need, like, some people get famous, right, for being an agitator. That's not their goal in seeking that. Some people do realize the power of a platform too, right? Like, well, I am famous now. I have a lot of attention. I am going to use my voice. I'm not going to shy away from this. But the difference in the people that you named is that people are the intentions of what people are doing.
Right.
And people are using that to mobilize, or as you say, that's the form of digital violence, right? We getting our message out here. We giving opinions that are contrary to what's popular. We're exposing people, and we're organizing people. So you are exactly right. And there are two types of agitators. And I love this phrase that you're using, though, digital, like digital activists.
Which we need a lot of them.
Yeah. And the reason why it's interesting to me, and you saying we need a lot of them, because the other thing that people don't correlate, and I do talk about this a lot too, is that the world has changed. So a lot of times we think about activism in the ways that Martin Luther King and the folks organized. We're in a completely different era right now. And our kids, right? So even organizing our kids around certain things. We have this conversation a lot of times about how kids in today's world orient themselves to each other in ways that we as adults would find weird. Just like when we did stuff as kids, our parents found it weird. So kids talk all the time over social media. That is just how they talk to each other now. They they DM each other, they're in each other's inboxes, they FaceTime all the time. You're like, you don't want to go outside? No, we're just sitting here talking, playing the game. It's just a completely different world. So even talking about digitizing how we reach people and how we digitize activism, I think is a very important point to bring up, because I think we're still using old strategies and old tools in a new world.
That's so important to lift up, because I think sometimes people poo-poo my work.
Why do they do that?
Well, they say really funny things to me, like, well, I ain't with all that internet I'm not with all that like Twitter stuff or blah, 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 whatnot. And, I'm a real activist. I'm a real person. I'm sitting in my library with my dashiki, and blah, 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 that whole thing and whatnot. What I need those people to hear from me is this. The world needs to hear from you. You need to be seen and heard. You have a lot of information that would change minds or make people be different if they heard from you. And here's my biggest selling point. Stop poo-pooing these tools. White supremacists are infiltrating law enforcement with these tools. White supremacists are radicalizing young white boys to kill your children with these tools. These tools are helping people organize January 6th. These tools are helping people who don't know each other in Idaho and Oregon and New Orleans and Louisville be connected with each other and share information with each other about how to attack schools, how to attack people, how to attack ideas, how to share a language or whatnot. If you think that the revolution didn't go online and that the counter revolution didn't go online and you're going to be analog. Okay, Mr. Analog, Miss Analog, do your thing. Do your thing. But while you sitting there being analog and watching us die, I'm going to try and modernize our tools for the revolution. We need to, if you spend 10 minutes, just do a Google search, spend 10 minutes about white supremacist Twitter and white supremacist online activities, it will scare you to death about what the hell, where's our infrastructure? Where's our digital infrastructure?
Chris, you better say that. You better say that. So one of the things, and I knew you were coming on, I was trying to like formulate this question to speak about that exactly, because I do feel like Brightbeam and Education Posts presents a counter narrative to white supremacist media, right? But some would consider it black media, black education media. But I think because I've been able to use this tool in a different way, it's black education media, but we get to share our thoughts. We get to share our ideas. I get to educate people. And I don't just get to educate people that I'm right in front of, that I see and I touch like children. I'm in people's cars. I'm in people's homes. I'm in, college, universities. Like that's where my voice is. That's where the people who I talk to, this is where this podcast ends up and lands, which is super, super important, because exactly what you're talking about white supremacist media and where these messages and voices and things line up and how they have their own platforms, right? Meaning black people, we all on Twitter and all these platforms that are owned by white people. Meanwhile, these other white people who aren't with, like, I don't want to mingle with black people. I don't want to be in this black speak or this woke talk. I'm not arguing back and forth with them. Have their very own platforms that are just dedicated to white supremacy. So one of the tools people will ask, like, where's Trump now? You can kick him off Twitter. This man is on a whole nother platform with a whole nother set and group of followers and having conversations that we aren't even privy to or engaged in, right? Planning the next January 6th.
I don't know if you know this, like, Isaac Hayes. You know who Isaac Hayes is?
Of course. Okay.
I just want to, I was waiting for you to say no. Some of your listeners don't. But so
that's my guy.
His son actually owns a social media platform called Fanbase, which is a competitor to a lot of these social medias, and it's black owned. Solange and others, I think, made an effort to buy Black Planet. And some of y'all are not old enough to remember Black Planet, but I used to be on Black Planet back in the day or whatnot. It was all black on social platform or whatnot. We don't own enough of the means of production in media or education, and we need to make use of the bigger platforms for now, but we need to continuously be setting up our own platforms. You need your own platform. Others need their own platforms, because then you own the means of production for whatever you put out on that platform, which is why we exist. We are trying to help more people. We can democratize who has a voice and who has the power to say and to be out there. But this idea of, like, listen, the Moms for Liberty, for instance, people who have not been paying attention into watching them, their entire goal is to get suburban white women to be angry about the schools and to be afraid that woke kind of diversity and inclusion people are taking over the schools and making their white children feel bad about being white. That's their entire game plan. The way that they weaponize that game plan is through digital means and digital activities. They are digital activists is basically what they are. They are not brick and mortar activists. They didn't go across the country uniting white women. They did that online. And the result of that online effort is that there are states that passed laws that took black books out of the schools.
Yep.
And is firing black professors. And is firing black educators for teaching black things in schools. If you don't think that the digital world has material power over your life, we're going to keep missing the boat. It starts with black authors and then black books in general, and black thought, black scholarship in general, and then black teachers and black educators and black schools. They're not just having an impact on what their little white kids can learn and not learn. They're having an impact on what our kids
can learn
in those same states, in whole states.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
All done on Twitter.
Yep. So then my question would be, right, because that's an excellent point. Again, that's another thing that came to mind for me is, like, there are groups out there, extremist groups, who use media to their advantage to do things like and have very like outcomes, results, really impactful results, to the detriment of marginalized people. So what should be the media's role in education? And now, right, that we bring up this point more specifically for Black education. How do we begin to use media to organize and lift up our concerns and our voices and even fight back on those counter narratives that happen in certain states?
This is a deep question for For media writ large, I think it is to always make the public smarter about the real issues within education. The real issues within education is that no racial group in the United States is succeeding on the national report card for education. The majority of American children, period, can't read at grade level and are not numerate at grade level, period. Mm-hmm. We are graduating people that never read a book again after high school. It's like 70% or something like that. Never read a book again after high school. We are becoming a dumber and dumber and dumber society. And it's because our education system is a dumbing system over time. So the real role for the regular media is to get underneath the hood. Why is reading not working? What is the science? What's the evidence say? What do the experts say? And get out of the dumb discussions of, should we have, the biography of the Little Rock Nine in schools or whatnot. That's a diversion from the fact that you don't know how to teach reading as a system, as a country. We don't. Mm-hmm. Black media has a different thing. This is my own bias about what black media has a difference. First of all, black media needs to get out of the Beyoncés of the world and start talking about some real things. We are trading so much superfluous information between each other about Bravo reality network shows and everything else. We are so enamored with all this nonsense or whatnot that we are not minding the shop. The black intellectual development is in itself the only thing we should be talking about until we get it right for our kids. And you're part of this work. The part of this work that I think is really important is that I see the Center for Black Educator Development and others doing is my theory. After 1954, after Brown versus Board, we lost educational capital. Mm-hmm. Integration actually robbed us of black educational capital. Our entire goal in all of our conversation right now should be to restore black educational capital. The way that we own the means of education, meaning the scope, the sequence, the curriculum, the budget, the schooling, the building, the buses, the food contracts, what we feed, let me keep going down the line. If that's not in our control, we're not done with our revolution yet.
Yes.
So for our media, our black journalists are not really interested. First of all, I just want to be very clear. I want to be very harsh right now.
Please be harsh.
Our black journalists, number one, are chasing career goals. They're not chasing race goals or people goals. Oftentimes, when they are, they're going for what bleeds. They are going for the shooting, the death, the destruction, the being beat up. Most of our journalists are college educated people who very much live in a middle class world and lifestyle, who are doing a very poor job of telling the stories of marginalized people within their own communities, their own race, right? So for them, there's no issue I think they fall down on more than education. Mm. It's the worst reporting I've seen on anything. Reporting is supposed to make you smarter about what's going on in your schools, supposed to make you smarter about how education works. And our public is not very informed about schools, schooling, how they work, whatever. I hate this assessment. I'm sorry to but this is my assessment.
I don't think it's a bad assessment at all. No. When I look at, as an educated black person, what my consumption is on black media, it is the things that you're saying. It is a bunch of Bravo housewife shade room, it is.
You doing it?
Right? Yeah. But what's funny about that is I always laugh back and forth with Sharif, right? Because, he liked to read. That's his thing. He reads everything. Him and Dr. Carr, right? I read for the purpose of knowledge. I don't read for enjoyment. I'm going to read because I need to read for intellectual capacity, meaning I'm trying to get smarter on a specific subject. There's knowledge that I'm seeking from a historical perspective that I need to know. I have these targeted things that I do for reading. I don't read for enjoyment. But one of the things I do, I read every day. I read the news. So I open up, and my digital is my form of how I get my news, right? I like to read it. I might turn on, one of the channels, but I do like to read articles. I will read an article from start to finish. But when I'm looking at my consumption of what I'm reading about the black perspective of what's going on with black people in the world, it is a bunch of trash, right? I'm not even going to say that it's not, but that is actually what's out there for me to consume. Now, the other thing that I do read, but I have to seek it out, is information about black finance. Right. So as Black people, where is our wealth? How do we gain wealth? How do I create revenue streams and mitigate certain things that aren't available to Black folks and study how other Black people did it, just to gain a sense of stability for me. But when I look at education, I either see two extremes, especially when you're talking about Black children. So you either have, again, these very solo stories about the kid who got accepted to 42 colleges, right? Like, you have that. And then
I love those stories, by the way, though.
They are great stories.
I love them.
I'm not saying that they're not great. I just would like some diversity. So you have those. And then you have these other just bottom of the barrel perspectives about how here we go again with Black children in the dumps, right? And it's just like it's no in between. And the whole story of education isn't reported on. I very rarely see stories with Black children at the center, but white educators being held accountable for what they're doing to Black children. And I would like to read a lot more of those stories because that's who's in control in the building that Black children are learning in. I would love to see more stories holding white educators accountable, but then having white educators tell us how they're going to get out the way and allow us to, like you said, restore education capital. And I don't see those in between or stories that paint the whole picture. And it becomes a lot of drama in education, right? So public versus charter and it's just the stories, like you said, that get reported on that have Black children scooped up and looped up right in the middle, all about drama, money, and capitalism. And nobody talks about the well-being, the life trajectory of Black children for receiving poor education and living in these poor Black neighborhoods. So very interesting. I'm glad you put that point.
Anytime you say that, though, I don't see stories that say X. That sentence in itself is it's the business model for why we need everybody developing platforms to fill the gap. This is why we need to raise up voices. Because we're not hearing ourselves. Like when Black people weren't hearing themselves on radio, they developed whole different genres of music that eventually radio listened to, right?
Right.
I mean, all of hip hop was the outlaw music for a period of time. You never heard it on the radio. It was never going to be on radio. You had DJs telling you, you can't make love to that. Like that'll never be.
That ain't what the people want to hear.
Now you can't hear anything but it. So,
but you got me giggling, right? And the reason why I'm laughing, because you're right. We need to be able to create whole platforms of the stuff that we want to see, we want to hear, want to listen to. But then my question becomes for you, like, do you think somebody's going to really dedicate a platform to trashing white women in education? Like, is that really going to be a thing?
Well,
seriously?
I mean, listen, okay, let's maybe not trashing white women, right? But I will say this, if people go to educationpost.org/Jane.Crow, what they will find is an entire microsite on white women's misuse of social and political power to over-influence education.
Mm-hmm.
You'll find an entire platform on that with white women themselves talking about it. So yes, this is a perfect example. You tell me, do you think anybody would ever do, something that would have to tell this story? And my response is, we just did that.
You did.
We just did that. Built a whole platform on it. Number one, only for the reason that you have already stated, which is you just said, as a consumer of the news, these are the stories I don't see. These are the perspectives I don't see. And my response to that is create them and then pressure journalists to actually pick them up and get them into broader audiences too. If our journalists aren't going to do the story, if they're lazy and they're not going to do the stories or cover the things, write the story first and then ping them on it and keep pinging them on it until they do write the stories.
But what's the journalist? I always have this question when I talk to media folks. What is the journalist's responsibility to the public? Do they have a responsibility to the public?
Well, the Fourth Estate, they have they have kind of like a historic traditional role of being the ones that create an informed citizenry. They don't take it seriously, and money and profit oftentimes gets in the way of them fulfilling their role, which is why independent media and independent journalist sources and nonprofit journalist sources. Like, listen, if you read ProPublica, for instance, which is a nonprofit education, or not education, journalistic platform, you're going to see stories there that you're not going to see in corporate media, right? Mm. Because they're not corporate media. You're going to see stuff on Democracy Now! That you don't see anywhere else. Your radio station, WURD, Word in Philly, whatnot. Yeah. I'm going to hear things on that I'm not going to hear anywhere else, right? I've been on the Bev Johnson show before, which to me was like this big honor because I was an 80s person watching Donnie Simpson and Video Soul and all that type of stuff. So to, at this age of my life, be on Bev Johnson show, who used to be on the Black Entertainment Network, right? She used to raise issues that nobody else was raising, and she still is, but just doing it on Sirius Radio. I think, we at the end of the day, we don't put enough pressure on answering the question you just said. What is your responsibility? As a journalist, you have a responsibility. As a Black journalist, that opens a whole different ball of wax. What is your responsibility, Black journalist?
Yes, for sure. Because my question would be, like, as a Black person, number one, what's your responsibility to your people? And number two, how should Black people be holding Black journalists accountable? Especially the ones that's in the mess and in the trash. Like,
I'm going to say something provocative here. I don't know if it's provocative. It may not be provocative. It's a compliment to you, though. It's just sometimes these people and these folks are not the real power, and they're immaterial, and we can over-index on them. We're the power. This is why I want our voices out there in these platforms. I guarantee you, anybody listening to this right now, take this challenge for me. Find 2 or 3 Black journalists of note, read their last 3 or 4 things that they published, and then go and watch one of your last talks with Dr. Carr or Dr. Carr and Karen Hunter, or wherever you find him. And you tell me what you become more educated by within an hour of each. Go watch an hour of Jason Whitlock or some other, notable person, and then go watch an hour on this platform or any of Dr. Carr's platforms. And you tell me which one makes you come away more educated about what you need to do in life.
I mean, I'm already going to say, listen to this platform. I mean, my shows with Dr. Carr and others. I mean, but that's why in my real life, right? I'm surrounded by people like the Dr. Carr. Like, that's my Baba. That's my mentor. Because that is, right? Like, that is what I consume technically every day. Like, yeah, read the little trash stuff. There's a balance in life of, like, yes, being around and listening and consuming positive media and people who know about education and people who know about getting things done. I agree with you wholeheartedly. The platforms are out there. They are. But I do still think that there needs to be a level of accountability held for folks who are on Front Street reporting out on or highlighting issues in Black lives and not doing it the right way. We do need to
what they will tell you. This is what they'll tell you. And as an old guy, like, we talked about my origin story, where I came from, but all that, like, blogging I was doing way back in the day or whatnot. I was also reading Emerge magazine, and I had also grown up on reading Jet. I just recently bought the Jet magazine that came out on my birthday in '68.
That's dope.
And going through it, that little magazine had so much information about what was going on in Black world just in a small little magazine that I thought to myself, damn, we have lost a lot of things. Emerge magazine was that for me in the 90s, right? We had these kind of information sources that were really deep if you wanted to be deep, right? I don't know that people want to be deep right now today anymore, ever again. I don't think like what journalists might tell you is, yeah, I could write those stories, but if nobody's clicking on them.
Yeah. I mean, that's a hell of a point. That's a hell of a point too, because it is about what public consumption is. But I think it's such a deeper and a longer conversation on where you have to get to, well, why people don't want to be deep. And that's not the root of the problem. People don't just not want to be deep. People are like, don't give me that Black power shit. Like, that's, people don't wake up feeling like that. It's a lot of commitment and brainwashing that has happened. And a lot of organizing and us not being ready again to fight people who are ready. Moms of live, like, you know what I mean? To have Black mothers who are ready to take on and defend and stand up with what they want their children to have. So people don't wake up and just not want to be educated or woke or deep. That's a long history of deprogramming of Black people, of learning how to decenter ourselves in the conversation, which is, again, yet another problem in itself. But I mean, we just appreciate you, Chris. We appreciate these platforms for giving Black people, giving Black educators a voice to tell our stories, to continue to keep us relevant and connected in so many different ways. I think that's the other thing that people overlook when you're talking about digital media. This is a way to keep us interconnected nationally, internationally. Because when I have Dr. Carr on, baby, I got people listening to me in London, Africa, Germany. I mean, from all over. So creating platforms like this to keep us connected across the diaspora. Again, I can't thank you enough for that. I thank you all. I think you all are the real, the power is the collective. The power are the people with the information. And we, like I said, I want to reiterate, we don't give platforms to anybody. We help you build your platform because you have a platform in waiting. Whoever you are, I'm going to keep saying my message. We need to hear from you. People need to hear from you, and how they are going to hear from you is where we come in. That's the help you need. You have a platform in you with it already. Somebody just needs to help you kind of like build it and, brush it off and get it going. Yep. And he means it. He's not just saying it. I mean, him and the team lives it, y'all. The stuff they be trying to get me to do to further promote this show, I got to break out of my own level of shyness, and yes, I'm shy in terms of the public eye, right? I'm an extrovert, but I don't want to be putting myself out there and all that. But the things that they do to push to be able to do that, to again further the show and further the voices that are on it, he's dedicated. He means what he says. There is a time in this show that we allow our guests to go ahead and thank a Black teacher. So I want to give you the floor and give you the opportunity to thank a Black teacher or thank some Black teachers.
All right. Well,
what's going on?
Let me first thank Sharif El-Mekki, who I met 7 years ago. When I took a trip to Philly, my first trip to Philly, it was specifically to meet him and to see this thing that he was doing with other Black educators. And I walked into a building that night and I saw a lot of young, sharp, well put together, educated Black men who were having fellowship with each other around the idea of teaching and around the idea of being great teachers. And I left so moved that night that it changed me in a lot of ways. My trip up until that point in Philly had been really depressing because I had listened to students all day the day before. I spent an entire day just listening to students in this big forum that they held, and it was run by students. And I was so depressed after that with what the students realistically had to say about their observations of education, that to see what Sharif was doing with Black educators and the way they were addressing that issue changed me. And it made me like a lifetime supporter. And that's why we are where we are right now. Right. And that's why at the end of the year, last year, I put out in my own personal social media channels, I am donating to this group and I encourage you to do the same. We all can be philanthropists. We can invest, in these type of things. But the reason I'm laughing is in my own life, I never had a good year in school. I never had a good teacher ever. In any grade. But I do want to mention to Miss Grace, wherever you are, you raggedy fool. So for Miss Grace, who I can remember one day came into the classroom and yelled at us and said, "You the most ignorant group of Negroes I have ever met in my life. And none of y'all gonna do nothing." I did something. I have a nice house, a nice car, a nice family. So Miss Grace, with your raggedy ass, anyways, thank you. Thank you, because I knew at that moment, this is my fuel to do something and be something in life. So sometimes teachers teach when they don't even, she taught me all about bourgeois politics. She taught me all about class dynamics, whatever. So anyways, is that what she was looking for in terms of this thank a teacher?
It wasn't, because even though you didn't have a good educator, there's educators that you've been in touch with out in the world that you want to thank for their service. So I appreciate you thanking Sharif during this segment. Yeah, there's a lot of Miss Graces in the world that need to be checked, and you called it out. So there's a couple people like right now. I remember my raggedy ass so and so too. So I mean, maybe I should create a segment called "Who was your raggedy ass teacher?" But
the thing that Sharif has taught me, and he has said so often, is like, yeah, we need more Black teachers in the classroom. But he always like adds a thing: we need more conscious Black teachers in the classroom.
Most definitely, right. Conscious and quality. Like we need Black teachers who could teach. We don't need them just for the sake of having them. Mm-mm. But I'm sorry that your school experience was like that, brother. But I'm glad that in your adulthood, you were able to have a positive experience with Black educators and create, or a part of creating a system to make sure that your children have a positive experience, and other people's children have a positive experience in education. So, well,
I appreciate y'all. Keep building the center. Keep building the Center for Black Educator Development.
Listen, that's all we doing out here, okay? This little podcast is like a smidget of my time. Sharif be having us out here working, okay? All right. Well, Chris, we thank you for coming on. We so appreciate you just taking the time out again for all that you do for us, but just coming on the show. And for everybody listening, Building a Black Educator Pipeline is a show hosted by the Center for Black Educator Development in partnership with Brightbeam. So subscribe wherever you like to get your favorite podcast, share, and like. But we thank you all for coming on to listen to another episode. We'll see you here next time. Peace, y'all.